Another week, another disappointing celebrity. And this week, it's Hannah Einbinder, who is a comedian and actor. She was recently on the Stephen Colbert Show, which is what has inspired me to talk about her, because on the Stephen Colbert Show, she declared that she is no longer vegan and gave just the most nonsensical and illogical reason you could possibly think of. I mean, it is just so frustrating, the reason that she gives. But beyond just the illogical argument that she uses, another disappointing aspect of the clip that we're about to watch is also how the audience reacts to her, because wow, I mean, the way the audience reacts is shocking, truly shocking. So let's get into the video, and now let's check out the clip of Hannah Einbinder on the Stephen Colbert Show.
Also, I do need to clarify, I was vegan at one point, I no longer am vegan, I just gotta clarify that. Okay. I just think that the pressure needs to be put on corporations who do a lot of the damage to our environment, and less so like on the individual. I think like it's super important to go vegan, and I don't want PETA to be mad at me. I'm not discouraging people from being vegan, but I do just think it's like way more impactful for the like 53 corporations who are like destroying the planet to take charge on that.
Sure, much in the same way that, yeah, we can all change our light bulbs.
Yeah.
Light bulbs, but maybe let's get rid of the coal plants first.
No, literally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So straight away, I think we can see there are some obvious flaws in Hannah's argument. And what screams out to me straight away is that she contradicts herself in this short clip. She basically says that there's no real point to her being vegan because we need corporations to change. They're the ones doing all the damage, so why should she change? Because she's just one person, so she's not going to make a difference. But then she also says, you know, it's super important for people to be vegan. Why? Why is it super important? It either is super important for us to be vegan, or us being vegan makes no difference and it should be on corporations to change because they're the ones causing all the problems. And then Stephen says, yeah, sure, we could change our light bulbs, but perhaps we should shut down the coal plants first. Just from an environmental perspective, it's such bad logic because it's not one or the other. Let's change light bulbs, make them more energy efficient, and let's switch to green energy. Yes, of course, it's not one or the other. So the logic that he's using is flawed anyway. But the thing that really upsets me about what Stephen says, and this whole clip in general, is how minimizing it is to veganism. Because what Stephen's doing at the end there is he's comparing a philosophy, an ethical philosophy, that is about treating non-human animals with moral consideration and compassion, and, you know, a sense of respect, just the most basic way that we should be viewing non-human animals. He's treating veganism, an ethical pursuit and philosophy, as being something that is comparable to changing our light bulbs to more energy efficient light bulbs. Those two things are not comparable. Firstly, from an environmental perspective, they're not, because the impact of going vegan far outweighs the positive impact of changing our light bulbs, even though let's do both things, right? So they're not even comparable when it comes to the environmental issue at hand. But this isn't about that, is it? Because what Stephen is doing by making this comment is he's minimizing everything that we do to animals because he's removing them and the consideration that they should be granted from the movement that's trying to defend them. He's removing non-human animals from veganism and making veganism about something that's noble to do for the environment, but ultimately is kind of similar to changing your light bulb, which ultimately is pointless because, hey, we've still got coal plants, so let's tackle those first. And I think this speaks to a really big problem that exists around the perception of what veganism means and what it's about and why it exists. People think that veganism is something that you do because, yeah, it's better for you and it's better for the planet, so you can kind of dip in and out of it. It's a diet, it's noble, but hey, it's not really that important. But that's not what veganism is. It is a movement about safeguarding non-human animals and treating them with the moral consideration and respect that they deserve. That's what it is. And I find it really minimizing to their suffering. And I find it really disrespectful to what they are forced to endure that we remove them from the conversation. And we don't even view them as being a part of veganism. And instead, we then make veganism all about us. And not only do we make it about us, but we then even minimize its impact in terms of the benefits that it brings us for environmental reasons. That's a really concerning way of viewing veganism. And also, I think it would be interesting to see if Hannah and Stephen are consistent with their logic. For example, let's say that there is a Republican from Texas, someone who from an ideological perspective and a cultural perspective is probably very different to Hannah and Stephen and probably opposes them politically, let's say. Let's say that this person from Texas, this Republican, sits down with Hannah and Stephen and says to them, should I buy an electric car or a Ford F-150? Now, a Ford F-150 is a huge pickup truck. It is a car that is seen very frequently, let's say, in places like Texas, this pickup truck, and it is not good for the environment. It is a gas-guzzling machine. So this cowboy, let's say, from the heartlands of Texas, who's always voted Republican, sits down and says, should I buy an electric car or a Ford F-150? Please tell me what I should do. What do you think that Hannah and Stephen will say? Now, I'm pretty confident that they'd probably say, get the electric car. And the reason they'd say get the electric car is because getting the electric car is better for the environment. Do you think that they would turn around and say, get the Ford F-150? If that's what you want, get the Ford F-150 because it's not on you. It's actually Ford's fault. You see, it's not your fault if you buy the Ford F-150 and then contribute to more environmental harm than you need to and than you would have done if you'd bought the electric car, but it's not your fault. Get the Ford F-150 because it's actually Ford's fault and car manufacturers and truck manufacturers. What do you think that Stephen and Hannah would say in such a situation? If it helps clarify your answer any further, Stephen drives a Tesla. And I imagine the reason he drives a Tesla is probably because it's an electric car and probably because driving an electric car is better for the environment. Which says it all, doesn't it? And also, going off what Hannah has said, would it be better if nobody was vegan? Is that what she thinks? Because the reason that she's no longer vegan is she says, well, it's not on me. The corporation should change. So obviously she thinks that her being vegan is pointless. It doesn't make a difference. If anything, her no longer being vegan is her kind of insinuating that her being vegan is maybe causing problems. Because if it wasn't causing problems, why wouldn't she stay vegan? So is she saying that nobody should be vegan? Is she saying that the vegan movement would be successful if every vegan stopped being vegan? Does she think the corporations will change if every vegan stops being vegan? Is this really what she thinks? Because this is what she's insinuating. She's saying, I'm no longer vegan because, in essence, it's pointless me being vegan, and they should be the ones to change, the corporations. And the way I'm going to make them change is by supporting them again. I am going to pay these industries by buying their products, but through buying their products and no longer being vegan, I am demanding that they change. My goodness, that's so flawed. It's so obviously flawed, isn't it? Why would these industries stop farming animals if people keep paying them to farm animals? But actually, worse than that, why would these industries stop farming animals if people who had stopped paying them start paying them again? Why would they change? You know, it's one thing people buying their products. It's another thing people stopping and then starting again because they want them to change. How does that make any sense? I can't believe that she has sat there and given this response and clearly thought that it's a good response. I can't believe that people have clapped and whooped and cheered at this response. She's saying corporations should change, and the way I'm going to make them change is by giving them money to keep doing the thing that I want them to stop doing. But the thing is, because Hannah's argument is so obviously flawed, I find myself questioning the integrity behind that argument, the sincerity behind it. Does she actually believe that? Does she actually mean that? I really, really doubt it. I think that Hannah has wanted to go back to eating animal products for probably a selfish reason, convenience, or whatever it may be. But she doesn't want to feel like a bad person. You know, maybe she's someone who, you know, likes to have this idea that she cares about these issues, but then how does she kind of reconcile that with going back to causing the problems that these issues cause? So she has to find an argument that allows her to go back to eating animal products, but also means that she doesn't have to feel like a bad person. And this just ticks that box perfectly, because it's not saying that it's not an issue. What we do to animals is an issue. She's not saying it's not, but what she's saying is that it's not her fault. It's someone else's fault. So now she can go back to eating animal products and still not feel like a bad person because it was never her fault to begin with. But of course, this is a supply and demand industry. And actually, let's just talk about the ethics for a moment. Let's say that we weren't talking about meat, dairy, and egg consumption in the US or the UK, but we're talking about dog meat consumption in somewhere in Southeast Asia, for example. Would we, in the cultures where we live, use this argument to morally justify someone buying dog meat when they don't need to? Obviously not. If someone goes into a market and purchases the flesh of a dog, knowing full well that in doing so, more dogs are going to be killed and slaughtered, does that not mean that the person who's bought the dog flesh when they don't have to is morally responsible for what happens as a consequence of them buying it? Yes, absolutely. Of course it does. And we believe that. We don't think that people who buy dog meat are acting morally. We think they're acting immorally. But they could turn around and say, hey, I'm actually against what happens to dogs, but I just think it should be on the dog meat producers to change. We would never use this logic to morally justify what happens to, dogs in Southeast Asia and to justify people buying dog flesh in Southeast Asia. But yet in the countries where we live, all of a sudden, for many people, this argument becomes a moral justification for needlessly causing non-human animals, suffering and harm and death. And the thing is, nobody is saying that these corporations shouldn't be held to account. Nobody's saying that they shouldn't have the light of scrutiny shone upon them. But we're also just trying to be realistic here and saying that consumers are the ones paying for these products. And if we keep buying them, these industries will just keep doing the same thing again. You see, one of the most concerning practical issues around what Hannah says is for Hannah's logic to be true, for it to be the case that consumers can eat animal products, but these industries will still change regardless of that fact, that requires at least one of two things to happen. Either, firstly, these industries have to change on their own accord, which obviously they won't. These industries are evil. They are immoral. They don't care. These are violent, cruel, nefarious industries that profit off the exploitation and harm of others. Do we think they're going to wake up one day and go, oh, hang on a minute, what we're doing is immoral, we should change? Of course not, especially when they're not being financially incentivized to change. So that's not going to happen. So the other thing that would be required for Hannah's logic to pan out would be for government to implement policies or legislation that essentially enforces change on these industries. But politicians aren't going to do that. They're especially not going to do that when people in society are actively saying through their purchases that they don't want change. Bear in mind as well that the meat, dairy, and egg industries are huge industries with massive amounts of political power and persuasion. They have lobby groups and lobbyists working in their best interests. Politicians are often involved in farming themselves. So politics on its own is not going to fix this. It never has. Any social change that has ever come about has come about because of changing attitudes within society. It's come about because the people within society have changed their mindsets and are challenging paradigms, and as a consequence, challenging governments and legislators to bring in changes to meet the changing attitudes of society. But if society's attitudes are not changing, if their consumption habits are not changing, if what they're purchasing is not changing, then the industries aren't going to change, and politicians are not going to enforce changes on industries when people are supporting those industries and actively showing through their consumption habits that they don't want these industries to change. So let's now, at the end of this video, talk about the audience reaction. The audience obviously whooping and cheering at the remarks that Hannah makes. It's a very disappointing thing. I mean, it's so disappointing. It's one of the most disappointing things I've seen recently in relation to veganism. Because obviously it's not graphic footage or anything like that, but it's disappointing because it speaks to the lack of sincerity and emotional honesty and intellectual honesty around this issue. People are so keen to not be vegan, so eager to not be vegan, that they will find anything they possibly can to justify not being vegan. Rather than sitting down and confronting the fact that being vegan is ethically the right thing to do and eating a plant-based diet is absolutely the right thing to do if you care about the environment, rather than sitting down and being open and honest and holding themselves accountable, they will look for anything. And so the reason they're whooping and cheering is because it's validating themselves. It's giving them a reason. Oh, this celebrity who I've come to listen to has said that she's no longer vegan for this reason. That's why I'm not vegan then. That's why I'm no longer vegan. And so they're whooping and cheering because they're validating themselves through doing so. Hannah has sat there and told them all that they can be good people and still be doing this bad thing because this bad thing they're doing is not their fault, is not their responsibility, is not their problem. And that's why it's so disappointing, because people won't take accountability. There is a certain irony to someone sitting on a stage and saying they should be the ones to do something. It is their fault. They should be the ones to change. When you have an audience of probably 100, 150 people who are reflective of many more people in terms of their attitudes, who are all going, yeah, it's all their fault. It's all of their problem. We can keep buying what they're producing because it's not our fault that we keep paying them money to keep doing the same thing. How disappointingly selfish is that? How insincere can these people possibly be to be cheering over animal suffering, to be whooping because someone has said they've gone back to funding slaughterhouses, to funding animal mutilations and death? People are clapping because someone has said they've gone back to doing something incredibly immoral, incredibly cruel. What a disappointment. And I suppose it's important to try and rationalize their behavior, to at least try and understand why people might react in this way. But at the end of the day, the only rationalization that I can see from this, the only way I can sort of decipher this is to say, it just shows how desperate people are to find anything to justify their bad habits. Any morsel of a justification will do, because people are so desperate to convince themselves that they're not bad people, or to soothe their cognitive dissonance. You know, that's what they're doing, soothing that dissonance they feel. And that's what Hannah's providing them, a sense of relief from that ever-present cognitive dissonance. I suppose that's the only way we can really sort of understand their behavior. That just speaks to how desperate people are to find anything to justify something, even if that thing is so clearly immoral. Anyway, I've been left very, very disappointed by this clip, as I'm sure you can imagine, or at least hopefully I've been able to communicate. But I would love to know what you think. So please let me know down below in the comments what your reaction was to the clip, to Hannah and Stephen's comments, to the crowd, and also any reactions you've had to anything that I've mentioned throughout this video. I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for watching, and as well that I'm very much looking forward to seeing you all in the next video.